Polls are currently underway in Australia. 17 million people are voting for their next Prime Minister. The battle has boiled down to two candidates, that is incumbent Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Australian Labor Party leader Anthony Albanese. Now, in the final stretch of a tough 6-week campaign, centre-left is narrowly ahead of the ruling Conservative coalition. But it is too early for them to celebrate because this year, independence could lead to a hung parliament. They are focused on their climate policies and are garnering unprecedented support. The House of Representatives has 151 seats. 76 is needed to form the government. All the seats are up for grabs, while the Senate has 76 seats, out of which 40 seats are up for election. Polls opened at 8 a.m. local time and will close by 6 p.m. It is important to note that voting is compulsory in Australia and initial results will not be known immediately because the election body will need time to count about 3 million postal votes. Let's listen in to what the people of Australia are expecting from their future leader.
Look, I think fundamentally for me it's about actually engaging with a lot of the international sort of bodies that Australia's stepped away from. It's a bigger commitment to, for me, it's actually international relations. So whether that's an increase in our diplomatic and aid components, that's important for me. Corruption, definitely. Having a federal ICAC is certainly high on my list. And I think, to be honest, I think we need change. I think it's time to have a refresh of what's important and what's prioritised, climate being, to be honest, one of the very top things for me as well.
I would hope that Australia would be able to introduce more climate policies, but I'm not quite sure if that's possible yet. So, but I mean, you know, I'm optimistic about it, so.
And for more insight into Australia elections 2022, we are being joined by Adam Hancock. He's a journalist based in Sydney. Welcome to our broadcast, Mr. Hancock. Well, my first question to you is that according to latest polls, the gap between incumbent Prime Minister Scott Morrison and his rival, Anthony Albanese, has narrowed. Now, do you think the incumbent Prime Minister can make a comeback?
Well, you certainly can't rule anything out, particularly when it comes to Scott Morrison. Back in 2019, when Scott Morrison was elected in, he was way behind in the polls. All of the polls had his opponents going on to win the election. Scott Morrison pulled off what was described as a miracle win. So if he's done it once, he can likely do it again. The pollsters have ensured us that this time their polls are going to be a lot more accurate. And therefore, we shouldn't expect another shock result that goes so far against the polls. But the polls are tightening at the moment. So Labour, they've led throughout. Anthony Albanese has had a good lead in total so far throughout this campaign. But as polling day has got nearer, the Liberal National Coalition has come back, and it's giving Scott Morrison a chance. He's been out hitting the campaign trail hard. He's been in lots of marginal seats over the last few days, all over the television, talking about his economic record. He's talking about how he can guide Australia through the cost of living crisis at the moment. He refers back to how he's done in the past. I mean, obviously, you know, he led the country through the pandemic. The economy did quite well in the pandemic compared to lots of countries around the world. So he's really pointing to that. It's very hard to know at the moment. We've got a lot of postal votes to be counted, about 3 million tonight. Also, over half of the eligible voters have already voted in early voting. So it's hard to know how much, you know, of a steer that might have in terms of the polls. But Labour, privately, they're admitting that it's going to be very tight. Right. The possibility of a hung parliament has been raised, so it's going to be fascinating.
Right. Like you mentioned that the cost of living is also an issue. My next question to you is that inflation in Australia has hit a 20-year high in April. And whoever comes in power will have to deal with this situation. To what extent will the economic situation determine the outcome of the polls? What do you think?
It's a huge issue, and I think it's the key issue, in all honesty. I've been speaking to voters at this polling station in North Sydney this morning. All of them are talking about the economy. All of them are worried. The phrase economic stability was repeated to me over and over again. Like most places in the world at the moment, there's a cost of living issue here. You know, you go to the pubs, when you're pumping your car with petrol, you notice the price. You go to the supermarkets, wages just aren't keeping up with the cost of living. And that's a real issue for people. When they raised interest rates recently, it became a big issue in the election campaign. Scott Morrison tried to distance himself from that. He said it wasn't a political issue. He said it's nothing really to do with him. He's tried to move away from that because he is campaigning hard on the economy. It's one of his key points. He talks about his record with the economy, his performance with the economy. So it's a major thing for him. And therefore, he's using this as an opportunity. He's saying, I've guided you through one economic crisis. I can do it again. But by far, there was a few polls done by the local newspapers. Economic woes are the biggest issue.
Right. Lastly, how important do you think is climate change an issue for the polls today?
Also a big issue as well. Voters have been telling me that's, that and the economy are the two big ones. If you live in Australia, it's very, very difficult to avoid the impacts of climate change. We've seen bushfires, we've seen recent flooding. We've had, even here in Sydney, we've had very unusual, lots and lots of rain. It's not normal for this time of year. So people notice it. A lot of people with children are talking about the future generations and how they want to protect them. And they want politicians to take climate change seriously. And that's why you mentioned at the top there about the independent candidates. A lot of them are campaigning based solely on climate change. They're offering something different to the major parties. And they're predicted to do quite well tonight. And I think that is because of their focus on climate change. And people feel the government and the opposition just aren't really doing enough about it.
Well, thank you for joining us and getting us up to speed on this. That was Adam Hancock live from Sydney. Thanks very much.
Thank you.